morning. Sorry for the delay. Welcome to the investment meeting of the Teachers Retirement Board for March 3rd, 2022. I'll start by calling the roll. Thomas Brown.
Here.
Russell Buckley. Cynthia Collins.
Present.
Allison Hirsch. Present. David Gazansky.
Present.
Deborah Penny.
Good morning, I'm here.
We have a quorum. So I'll turn it over to the chair.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. Good morning, everyone. We will start with Passport Fund's fourth quarter 2021 performance review. Mike Folio.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen.
You can.
Great. I love it when that works out. I'm going to start out with, as the chair mentioned, the Passport Fund's performance. This will be a very brief recap of 2021. And I'm going to focus folks' attention to slide 23 in that material, which summarizes the flash report through the end of the year. 2021, as we think back, and perhaps as you'll hear soon, in stark contrast to the beginning of this year, 2021 was marked by quite strong absolute returns across markets, and that resulted in strong absolute returns for the Passport Funds for the calendar year of 2021. You can see the Diversified Equity Fund had a return in excess of 20% last year. That was roughly in line with the hybrid benchmark. It did lag the global market composite benchmark. You might recall for the first 6 months of 2021, the global market composite benchmark, which was an additional or secondary benchmark of the Diversified Equity Fund. For the first 6 months of last year, it was entirely the Russell 3000 index. The US did outpace other markets last year pretty notably. And so that's why you see a relatively higher return for the global market composite index for the full calendar year of 2021. That index was up about 23%. The Diversified Equity Fund, as I noted, up over 20%. But again, the hybrid benchmark pretty close to the return of the Diversified Equity Fund, as you would expect. In addition to strong absolute returns last year, it was also a strong year for manager relative results. You can see that showing up here in the returns of the actively managed composite of the fund, as well as the international equity composite of the fund. The calendar year ended with assets of about $20.2 billion in the Diversified Equity Fund. The Balanced Fund last year ended the year with about $600 million in assets. It had a total return of about 5.2%, just a bit ahead of its composite benchmark, up 4.6%. The International Equity Fund was with assets of around $250 million, ended the year with a return of 8.4%. Again, pretty strong absolute returns for the fourth quarter as well, which capped off what was a strong 2021 across many of these funds. You can see the Sustainable Equity Fund last year ended the year with over $600 million in assets. It had an absolute return for 2021 of over 30% and was almost 3% ahead of its benchmark last year. The two index funds, you can see the US Equity Index with assets of about $91 million at year end, returned 25.8% last year, and the International Equity Index Fund with assets of approximately $13 million returned about 7.9% last year. I'll pause and see if there's any questions on the returns before I spent a brief moment on the manager scorecard.
Any questions for Michael? Okay, I think you.
Okay. So I'm going to flip ahead for those following along in their own materials to slide 37. This is the first page of the active manager scorecard, which we've discussed in recent quarters as well. There's no notable new flags as it relates to the active managers in the US equity composite. On this slide, I will call your attention to two managers who are currently tripping a flag for their one-year excess returns on slide 38. Those two managers, Spruce Grove and Bailey Gifford, you might recall these are among two of the more active strategies in terms of their expected risk profile compared to their benchmarks. They are lagging for they were lagging for the calendar year of 2021 and did trip this flag. We did meet with both of these managers in the fourth quarter last year. And of course, their strategies have been out of favor, which is showing up in these performance numbers. But what I'd underscore is the long-term results are quite strong. Relative results are quite strong for both of these managers. We don't have any significant concerns at this time. In addition to having had discussions with them in the fourth quarter, we'll plan to follow up with them again in the coming months to stay close to this as we've intended and discuss. I'll pause there to see if there's any other questions. Otherwise, I was going to move ahead to January.
Excellent. Doing a great job, Mike. No questions.
Okay. So we will move ahead to the Passport Fund report for January. And I did note what was in stark contrast to the strong 2021, a slow start, an unfortunate start to the beginning of 2022. Absolute returns, as we discussed last month in January, were quite negative across the board. You can see the diversified equity fund in January was down almost 6%. Not only was it a challenging month for absolute returns in both the US and abroad, but also it was a challenging month for active management. And so active management was a net detractor to excess returns for the month of January. You can see still what was a strong 2021 shows up in some of these longer term time periods when we look at the relative returns for the 1 year. However, January was challenged. The fund was down, as I noted, about 5.9%. The hybrid benchmark was down about 5.5%. So the negative alpha, if you will, from some active managers showing up in the relative returns, and the global market composite down about 5.5%. The balanced fund for the month was down about 2.4%. We also saw similar results for the international equity fund as we did for the international equity composite. As we'd expect, that fund was down about 5% for the month, lagging its composite benchmark, which returned negative 4.4%. The sustainable equity fund, which you might recall is comprised of stocks that tend to show up in the growth part of the market. And it's been a very challenging year so far for growth stocks in general, given the sensitivity that growth stocks tend to have to the Fed policies and the expectation that the Fed will look to tighten policy over the coming months. Growth stocks tend to react more negatively to that, as we've seen, and we saw the sustainable equity fund was down just over 12% for the month of January, and it lagged its benchmark, which was down about 8.6%. The US equity index was down about 5.9% for the month, in line with its benchmark, and the international equity index fund down about almost 3%, roughly in line with broad international equity markets. So I'll pause there before we move forward with an update on February market performance. Any questions? Okay, not hearing any, I'll turn it over to Devon to talk to February.
Thanks, Mike. Keeping on the same theme of difficult news, February was a difficult month for equities as a whole, obviously exacerbated by the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. Not surprisingly, we saw negative results in the diversified equity fund. On the global market composite, we saw a loss of 2.37%, and in the diversified equity fund hybrid, we saw a loss of 2.35%. On the news was also sad as well on the credit market side, as we saw some challenges as a result of monetary tightening expectations and higher than expected inflation data. The balanced fund benchmark had a loss of just over 1% for the month. In the international market, we saw losses across all components of the international composite benchmark, resulted in just under 2% loss for the month. And as Mike has alluded to earlier regarding the sustainable equity fund, we also saw losses there as well. I must mention as well that on an absolute term was the highest loss that we saw for the month across the board for all the benchmarks. I would continue with all the losses, but I mean, I'll pause there to see if there's any questions because the other two funds also had losses as well.
Losses for you, young man. Any questions? Okay,
Thanks.
we're depressed. All right, so we have the IPS, the passport funds IPS discussion, which will be led by. Yeah.
Michael's doing that, or Mike, you doing that?
Well, so Rokatan can jump in and maybe I'll take this one, Mike, okay?
Great.
So as we talked about in at the board meetings in 2021, there have been a number of changes to benchmarks and objectives for the passport funds, as well as for the pension funds. And so the board has asked Rokatan, BAM, and TRS to collaborate on an update for the IPS for both the pension fund and the passport funds. So what we included in today's materials are version of the IPS for the passport funds. The pension fund, work on the pension fund has started and will be complete no later than, I believe, no later than fourth quarter of 2022. I think there's some interest in having the permanent CIO be able to have at least review the RPS before it's presented to the board. So that will take a few more quarters. What we primarily chose to reflect in this updated IPS was changes in the composition of some of the passport funds. So if I'm sure you'll recall, there have been some significant changes to the diversified equity fund. For example, we've eliminated the defensive composite within that fund. And so, and we've also modified the benchmark for the diversified equity fund. So those modifications are included in this IPS. I don't think that we want to go through this version slide page by page, but we wanted to present it to the board for its consideration and review, and we'll be happy to answer any questions, I think, at the next meeting. Valerie, did you want to add anything to this discussion?
No, just that we are, circulating the document for board review and comment. And I apologize, I didn't hear it. If we could get comments within the next month, that would be great.
So again, just a high-level takeaway here. There's no substantive change in the IPS for the passport funds. Rather, what we're doing is we're sort of cleaning up the document to reflect changes that have been approved by the board over the last 2 years and implemented as well. And it primarily affects the diversified equity fund and the change in the defensive, the elimination of the defensive composite, and some changes made to the active equity, U.S. equity composite within the diversified equity fund.
Good. Okay. All right, great. We'll go into.
No, we go right into public.
Okay.
We have a pension fund. I don't
Yep.
know if they have the updates, which probably, yes, Mike, if he has any updates. I do.
Oh, wow.
Are we doing some exactly public? What was the
Public. So we're in public. So now we're in public for the pension fund.
Yes,
Okay.
so I sent over 3 performance slides, and uploaded to me. Do we have the ability to share those here? If not, I have Dan queued up in the office, and he can do screen share and do it from there.
Yeah, we should do
Probably better, okay. Dan, did you hear the request, please?
Yep, be right with you. Thanks.
Thank you. So in response to very clear messaging from this board about more frequently and timely performance, we fast tracked some processes, and we're able to show you some key results.
It's very unclear, Dan, it's very unclear, the audio.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Why don't you?
We just pass that around.
Take-
Could you unplug that, David?
I could. She said other gentlemen.
You're right, you're right. So we have three different slides on market returns, over and underweights, and importantly, the performance. But I think it's important, you heard from the Rokaton folks how bad January.
The audio is very unclear. Excuse me, I'm not able to take any of this down, Dan. It's just very muddled and unclear.
Can you hear me? I actually think,
So-
do they hear us better when?
Yeah, maybe you
can't have
gotta go
both
the
on.
other way around,
Well-
just not be able to hear them.
Try something. Want to give us 1 minute? We might be able to make something happen. Hang on. Do that. Yeah, we'll just.
So we'll have to deal with this one.
You see how he's trying to take your job, Ron? You allowing this?
This was in the end.
Such a good idea.
It's like
Good thing he's
small,
management.
well-developed.
Music teacher at work.
There you go.
Join the audio.
And a little bass. You want to be updated, but not red.
Okay.
It was just the green.
How
How did you miss that?
One piece of green up there.
It's like nothing.
Jeff, can you hear us better this way? Or not?
I
No?
think you know. Maybe just go back to where we can't hear them. Really, we need to have.
I
It's
can
important
hear
to
you
look
guys
around.
good.
Gets it all down.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. It's a problem.
We can read what happens. We can read what happens. Well, that sounds good. This is the tax system we're battling with, like,
Jeff, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
All
Not
right.
great, but I can hear you.
Oh.
All right, because now we're through the TRS system, so you should hear us better than from my laptop.
You sound good on my end.
I can hear you pretty well too, thanks.
All right, let's
All right,
do
we'll try
as best we
to
can. It's
speak
being
up.
recorded if you, so.
We'll do our best. And Jeff, I'll try and speak a little louder and more slowly.
Mike will use his teacher voice. That's what we call it, Mike.
So here's the results for several public market asset classes as of the end of February. And like the Rokaton folks, I'm sad to report there's a lot of red on that screen. And I guess I would just, what's also makes it unusual is both equities and fixed income had negative returns for the quarter. So I'm sorry, for the month, and also for the fiscal year. So as a reminder, the fiscal year is July 1st till the end of February. And, your portfolios are benchmarked against these index. They're not exactly like them because you do have active management in all of these asset classes. But this is to give you a flavor as to how poorly the indices have performed in both the month ending February and the fiscal year to date. Next slide, Dan. And then this is a different view, but the same that I shared with you last time about portfolio underweights and overweights in your asset class overweights and underweights in your portfolio. And I tried to show you a little time series here in the columns. The first column is what your strategic asset allocation target is. And then over the last 6 months, how those slight underweights and overweights have changed. And what I would draw your attention to is on the first row, how the cash weighting is 0, and that's gone up a little bit. And that's gone up as we have, if we go down to the bottom 3 rows in the 3 sleeves of public equities, we've gone from slightly overweight to slightly underweight. And as I shared with you last time, we, in a series of 9 different transactions, reduced your overweights. And, you know, when we took those proceeds, the question is, do we put them in fixed income, or what asset class do we put them in? And given the trends in fixed income of rising yields, we didn't want to go there. So we put them in cash, acknowledging, you know, in a long-term portfolio, the weighting in cash should be 0, but there are small periods of time when I think it's okay to be a slightly bit defensive and in cash. So at the end of February, this is a snapshot of the overweights and underweights. And I will add in the equity market, I think our last rebalancing trade, Dan, help me if I get this wrong, was maybe mid-January, early January. So let me switch screen. So those slight underweights have been a result of market moves rather than transactions. Let's go to the next slide. And then importantly, what is your overall performance of the fund? And big caveat at the bottom, you know, unaudited returns. This is from an internal risk system we use at BAM. And this includes publics and privates, you know, with the usual lags in privates and so on and so forth. But we had you at month to date, minus 1.4%, and fiscal year to date, minus 1.1%.
Thank you. Great. Anyone have any questions for Mike? All right, we appreciate that. It's very interesting. We like that. Thank you. Oh. All right, then it looks like we don't have anything else for public agenda. Do I hear a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Do I hear a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Hirsch. Any questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're going to executive session. Anyone who is not joining us, thank you for joining us. We'll see you later. And hang on.
Okay, in the executive session of the March 2022 investment meeting, there were separate presentations made for 2 different asset classes. There were also 2 separate discussions on specific investment matters. Action was taken on one, details of which will be announced at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, do we have anything else? All right, seeing nothing else, do I hear a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Ms. Hirsch. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Anyone disagree? Any abstention? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone. So in the past,
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye, Mike. Thank you.
Not in the